By the way, here's the overture. What? Here's the intro black hole. This is actually the overture, but the overture black hole. This is just the overture. The overture is pretty lengthy. I will warn you, it's pretty lengthy overture. It's pretty lengthy overture. As if it's just. By the way, this is actually the overture, so. This overture is actually pretty lengthy, but. Here's the intro of Black Hole. Is that a movie? It's a 1970s sci-fi movie. It's actually it's quite a cult classic. Now, this movie came out in 1979. This came out 2 years after the original Star Wars came out. Now, this is of course now. This was actually Disney's attempt to kind of get on a Star Wars craze before they bought Star Wars in 2012, 33 years later. Now, the Black Hole. Now, this came out in the late 1970s after the release of Star Wars. There was a huge boom in outer space-based sci-fi. Things, whether it be on a big screen, whether it be in movies, TV. With television, you had big ones like Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers, Space Academy. Does anyone? Jason of Star Command, which is actually a sequel to Space Academy. As well, Jason of Star Command. You also had you had a bunch of ones. You had fun fact: this movie starred Anthony Perkins and Robert Forster. He later, 21 years after Black Hole, later appeared in another sci-fi movie involving a conundrum involving a spaceship. That being Supernova, which I've made made shorts of. I'll have to make 3-minute shorts, full-length 3-minute shorts for. Supernova I know is one that's not very well remembered. Directed by Gary Nelson. Gary Nelson, he was actually, this movie had a pretty interesting production history. It was originally conceived in 1973. Disney had gotten their hands on a script called Space Probe 1 that was seen as a kind of a sci-fi riff on disaster movies. As everyone knows, in the 1970s, disaster movies were actually quite big deal. As originally in the 1970s, before sci-fi movies, one of the biggest crazes in blockbuster cinema, 1970s wise, was disaster movies. You had stuff like the Poseidon Adventure. You had Terror and Inferno. Space Probe 1 was originally written as a sci-fi disaster movie. It was originally about a space station that had orbiting a distant planet that has a disaster relating to a black hole that's about to suck it. Except that how that involves people on board. However, the original vision for the black hole was actually massively changed during post production. However, it ended up going through a period of kind of developmental production stalls that were caused by Disney having to change upper management. Basically, what the problem was Disney's knew how to. Around this time, Walt Disney's son-in-law, Ron Miller, had taken control of the company following Walt Disney's death, and was willing to take. And didn't really see Space Probe 1 as something that had any real potential.